Greetings and welcome back to the Association Matters Europe Insights series on this official PCAAE podcast, for conversations on governance, leadership, and impact in the association sector. When associations thrive, societies rise. We are your host. I'm Bobby.
And I'm Emily. And the title for today's episode 3 in our 4-part series of Europe Insights is Sustainability and Legacy in European Associations. As we are increasingly aware, sustainability is no longer optional. It is becoming central to association strategy. European associations are leading the way in integrating sustainability, ESG principles, and legacy planning. In this episode, we explore how associations in Europe create meaningful, measurable impact and ask, what lessons can we bring from Europe over to Asia and the wider region?
So our guest is Magali Horbert, Sustainability and Communications Manager of FIDI Global Alliance and co-chair of the Sustainability and Legacy Community of Practice of the European Society of Association Executives.
As Head of Sustainability and Communications at FIDI Global Alliance, the leading association for international moving and relocation companies, Magali works to make sense of what sustainability compliance means for the global mobility industry and companies operating within it. Then figures out how to turn that into practical and impactful solutions for FIDI's members and the industry as a whole. As co-chair of the Sustainability and Legacy Community of Practice at the European Society of Association Executives, Magali works to understand both how associations can help their members make sense of sustainability obligations and how associations themselves can play a role in shaping those sustainability conversations at an EU level. Magali is based in Brussels, which for someone who spends a lot of time tracking EU regulations, turns out and sounds like it's the ideal place to be living.
So hi, Magali, and thank you for gracing our podcast. We're really delighted to have you with us, so we can now start our conversation. Our first question is, what do you think are European associations struggling with, if ever, when it comes to sustainability?
First off, thank you so much, Bobby and Emily, for having me on this podcast and to let me speak on one of my favorite topics in the wide world, which is sustainability and how associations can really push this topic forward in a meaningful and impactful and practical way, I would add to that. So what European associations are struggling with when it comes to sustainability, I think it's the same thing anybody everywhere in the world is struggling to when it comes to sustainability, is just to, first of all, really understand what it means for them, what they can actually do, and what the practical steps and solutions are. Because right now it's very difficult to find the magic wand that makes you understand it all at once. So I think first off, to understand where the struggles really come from for European associations, it's that we've seen an absolute roller coaster in terms of EU legislation for sustainability over the past, I'd say, 5 or 6 years. So the early 2020s were like the golden years of EU sustainability legislation. That's when the European Commission launched its very ambitious EU Green Deal, pushing for the European Union to be net zero in carbon emissions by 2050. And that, of course, has an impact on absolutely everybody, any industry, any company, any individual living in or having relationships with the European Union. That's also when I took over the sustainability role, or created the sustainability role within FIDI, because we realized that from a compliance point of view, sustainability compliance was one of the top 3 issues that our members were struggling with. And now, of course, so that was in the early 2020s, and then, of course, the war in Ukraine started. Geopolitics became complicated, the economy became difficult. Companies also realized that it's one thing to come with grand statements and big pledges of becoming net zero and everything, but then actually walking the talk costs much more money and is much more complicated than they expected. And so we saw this rollback of sustainability pledges, strategy, money was drying up as well. And that's how we ended up currently in what's also called the trough of disillusionment, where some people think, well, sustainability was just a fashion, it was just a fad, now it's gone, we can go back to business as usual. Let's just say that international politics and international politicians are not really helping in that with that regards either. So now we're seeing like this, and the European legislation was the same thing. We had this massive, never seen rollout of sustainability legislation in all sectors, in all industries, very fast. Companies didn't know what they were supposed to do. Associations didn't know how they were supposed to help their members. And then all of a sudden there was this backlash, especially last year, where there was this very strong, what some called ESG or sustainability backlash, where some of the big legislation pieces of the EU were all of a sudden paused, rolled back, or just completely watered down. And so right now, from a sustainability legislation point of view, we're getting out of this complete paralysis and into what some would call the more practical standardization phase. It's still early days. Companies are still trying to understand what they need to do. And of course, that has a direct impact on membership associations. Now, of course, It depends. There's no one size fits all approach, because it really depends on the size of the association, the type of association, the type of industry that they represent, the type of membership that they have, the maturity of the association. So there's no one single answer to your question. But I think that for the smaller to medium-sized businesses, the real difficulty is, first of all, to understand what or how EU legislation is and will impact their members. So you need to understand the legislation. You need to understand the very complex topic of sustainability per se, which is already something very, very complicated. You need to understand where the pressure comes from, if it's legislation, if it's consumer. Within the associations in general, also, there is a very limited knowledge of the topic. There's a very limited resources, in-house resources to monitor, to develop solutions with its membership, as most companies as well, for small to medium-sized associations, they usually don't have a sustainability department or someone in their office I'm very lucky that I got the mandate from our board to really dive into this topic for FIDI. But most associations, especially the smaller ones, really don't have that luxury. So it's finding this balance between understanding what the needs actually are, both for the association and for its members, and then finding the time and the means and the resources to actually develop solutions when there is no roadmap. There is, for the moment right now, it still is all over the place. So there's no standardized approach, for example, to carbon measurement. There's no standardized approach to certification. So it really is, everybody has to kind of understand what their solution is with no guidelines. So I think that's really what most associations are struggling with. What I usually say when I'm asked, okay, so what should we do? What is your suggestion for associations? And that actually doesn't only count for European associations, but I see what I've been seeing in international legislation in terms of sustainability, as well as that other regions of the world are picking up very quickly. And I'm thinking specifically of the Asia region, Australia, New Zealand. There's a lot happening there as well. In South America, some countries are also pushing up their legislation pressure, their sustainability pressure. So for me, this is really a topic that any association anywhere in the world should really understand. And my recommendations there would always be, first, understand what the real pressure from a legislation point of view is wherever you operate now, and what you can expect in the next 5 years. Try and understand and translate that in very practical terms for your industry, because it's very different. The pressure is very different depending on that. And then try and find easy, practical words and examples to very complex topics. So, for example, one thing that we did in FIDI is we took the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and we created a working group, and we tried to understand, okay, for each goal, what does that mean in our industry? What would best
Yes.
practices look like for each goal? And we put that in a very simple report. And we said, okay, so if you don't know what sustainability means for the moving companies, for reload companies, read this. It comes with very practical examples and it just gets the ball rolling. And I think that's what most members and associations are looking for, is just very practical to-dos
Right.
in very simple terms, just to get the ball rolling. And I think that's really what we're looking for. And then the second one would be go look for collaborations with sister associations. So that's again something that we did, and that's something that the ESAE in Brussels is also promoting quite heavily, is to create coalitions, whether formal or informal, with associations that operate either in the same industry or in similar industries, in different sectors within your industry, because everybody's tackling the same complicated issues. So you might as well try and find the solutions together
Right.
instead of reinventing the wheel in your corner every time.
Wow, it really sounds like it's been a roller coaster ride over the past 20 years or so for you. But it also sounds like you've done an incredible job of making the complex simple. And I can only imagine how truly valuable that would be to the industry. Our next question, sorry, is what are European associations doing to be more sustainable themselves? And maybe you've got some stories.
So again, a big fat disclaimer, it depends on the size, the means of the association, and the maturity of the associations as well as the pressure they can get from their members. Again, using FIDI as an example, we work in a rather conservative industry. Let's just say that sustainability, just for saving the planet, wasn't very high up on the priorities list. So that's something we need to take into account. But I think that what associations again are trying to understand is how can they mitigate or lower the impact of their organization as a physical organization, but then also what impact can they have on an entire industry as people of an industry, right? So I'd say from pure organizational impact, again, it depends on the associations. A lot of associations in Europe now, post-COVID, a lot of them don't have offices anymore. They work from home. So that operational impact is actually already very small from the onset. Now, for those associations with larger teams and actually offices, I think the first step that they are looking at is how can they reduce the impact linked to their operation. So, for example, switching to green energy in their offices, going paperless, even though I think paperless by now is something really old school. Everybody should not be printing much anymore.
I agree.
But then you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Then you have recycling waste, foment the use of public transport or more sustainable transportation for their staff. Look at business travel is a big one. The use of water. So it's really this whole, how can, from a very practical point of view, how can they reduce the impact on their immediate environment as social actors or stakeholders, right? But again, that's mainly for the bigger associations with a big footprint from the beginning. But then one thing that often can get forgotten is the social side or the social aspect of sustainability. So that's everything taking into account staff well-being, gender parity, everything that has to do with HR. So again, in Europe, we might be lucky in the sense that most European countries have a very strong social framework when it comes to labor rules and labor laws. So it's actually it's a given that there are specific labor rules and labor laws in place. But if you really want to make a sustainability impact and also use that from a marketing point of view, then of course you need to step things up. So for example, I know of associations that have a monthly well-being day where they bring in massage therapists into the office, or they go walking in the morning, or they do. There's these small actions to create a better feeling in the workplace, right? Then another big point, I think, for associations in Europe, especially, but I think everywhere in the world, is events management. Because, of course, I think if there's one moment in an association's year where we really do have a big impact on the environment and wealth, it's when we do our events. And so many associations now are looking at, okay, so how can we lower that impact, for example, first off by being more mindful of the location that you choose. Work in locations where there is a lot of work already being done in sustainability. Choose a location that is easily accessible by train to limit the flying all around of your attendees. Find hotels that have a strong sustainability strategy in place to work on, for example, going vegetarian on the menus or working on waste reduction in the kitchen. Then, of course, we have the going completely paperless and stop printing assets and materials. So no more programs, no more booklets, no more pull up banners, and try and go digital as much as possible. Nowadays, that's not very difficult. Yes, and then the last point that I had was sustainable catering, because I think for those associations that provide food and beverage, that's one point where we can actually have a very strong and rather easy impact. It's to look at, okay, so what type of food are you serving? Can it be more local? Can you do a 100-mile menu, for example, is very fashionable in the UK at the moment. Can you do meatless Mondays? Can you reduce waste, things like that? And then again, use it in your marketing material, because for the moment, still, we can see that the pressure from the consumer side is quite big, and that the people who care about sustainability, we are very passionate people. And when we see an effort being made, I think that can definitely be a plus point for associations and companies all around.
Wow.
And then the last point that I had, of course, is that, and I think that's maybe the most important point for associations, is that for me, the purpose of industry associations and associations in general is really to help a whole sector or their members understand and make sense of complex topics. So in sustainability, I think the biggest impact that an association can have is in creating this awareness within their members, in helping them make sense of the topic, in giving them the tools to lower their impact on the industry. And I think that's, for me, maybe the most important way European associations, but also associations across the world, can do to be more sustainable themselves.
Wow. I agree with all your points, and it seems to be it's really universal, Magali. So our third and final question is about on measurement. So how do you think associations measure long-term impact in terms of sustainability and legacy?
I've been thinking a lot about this question because it's not an easy question to do. And I have to be very honest, I think most associations, just as most industries or most companies, are not doing this well yet. Because it's complicated, because it's complex, because there are no existing frameworks, there's no roadmap that you can just tick off the boxes and do without having to invent it yourself, right? So I think that long-term impact measurement, whether it's in sustainability or legacy, is something that everybody is struggling with. And I think one reason for that as well is that if you think about what associations do, we as associations are actually like one step removed from where the impact actually happens, right? So we hopefully influence members to do something or change something in their processes. So they will then hopefully change their behavior, which will hopefully change outcomes. But we are not in the position to see the outcomes immediately, right? So that's the whole setting up a metric system of something that you don't control completely from A to Z is actually really, really complicated. And then, of course, there's also the timeline mismatch, because, of course, the result of the impact sometimes is visible decades after you've started. And then most of the time, the people have changed, the priorities have changed, members might have changed. And so it's difficult to make the link between this one action or this one project that you launched 20 years ago to see the impact that it has, right? So it's again the position where every association kind of needs to think about, what does sustainability impact mean for them? What would the ideal outcome look like? And then just try and work towards that with maybe milestones that hopefully carry through the time, but without putting too much pressure on themselves, because again, no one has figured this one out. And then I would say legacy is even harder, because, well, if you look at the definition of legacy, like legacy would be like the lasting change that an association leaves on an industry or a sector that goes beyond again, this day-to-day operations, right? So it'd be like things like industry standards that it might have helped to establish, or legislation that it might have helped to shape, or a shift in how an entire industry thinks about an issue, or best practices. So it's something that is really, really, really long term, which is difficult to maybe keep track of in a structured way. So what I would say is that the most important thing here is to maybe not focus so much on the legacy aspect of things, but really focus on the mission and vision of your association and the actual values that you want to represent and that you want to bring forward in your membership, because that is going to be what your lasting legacy will focus on. And I think that a lot of associations use their mission and vision as a side project, where maybe someone developed that 20 years ago and then no one ever looked at it again until the marketing manager comes by and says, oh my God, we need to update this because it's outdated. I think that a lot of that it can be really, really a very useful opportunity to deep dive into what are the values that your association wants to bring. What change does your association want to bring within your membership, and then focus on that. The legacy will come afterwards, and probably when you as an individual person are not there anymore.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Magali. It's just been a wonderful conversation. We wrap up our podcast with 3 key takeaways. I feel like there could be a lot more than 3 out of this call, but I will do my best to sort of wrap it up with 3. Number 1 was, for me, I think sustainability must be made practical for members. So one of the biggest challenges associations are facing is turning the complexity of the sustainability requirements into something more meaningful and actionable for members. And associations can add value when they simplify those regulations, consumer expectations, and sustainability frameworks into practical guidance. But they can also play an important role in bringing members together, I think, possibly, and to create those solutions, making sustainability less overwhelming, I can imagine, and more achievable. Number 2 is associations leading by example and through influence. So I heard a lot there of that. You're touching on European associations becoming more sustainable by improving their own operations, events, and workplace practices. But I did sort of think there was a connection there by leading by example, and their greatest impact can sometimes possibly come from reducing their own footprint and then sharing those insights with the members and through the wider community, through educating, communicating, and shaping those practical tools. And number 3 was the tricky legacy question. But what I got there was, for legacy, you should focus on mission and values of your association. So sustainability, that long-term legacy, might not be something that we see today, but it can still reflect little by little in shifts in members' behaviour, and maybe having those impacts in those conversations for industry standards and shifting those long-term practices. It's hard, but the lasting difference I think associations can make are through shaping those policies, being the influence, and advancing their chosen mission that's relevant for them for now and in years to come.
Excellent, Emily, as usual on your summaries. So thank you again, Magali, for sharing your insights. And thank you to our audience joining us for Association Matters, where governance, leadership, and impact come together, because we believe that when associations thrive, societies rise. This podcast is brought to you by the Philippine Council of Associations and Association Executives, MEMBIS, AMS, and Pricing for Associations.
In our 4th and last episode of Europe Insights, our special series, we will explore how European associations operate within complex legal frameworks while leveraging technology and adapting to economic realities. I'm looking forward to that one also. Subscribe to our podcast and visit the PCAAE website for updates and full episode notes. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us, Magali.
Thank you, Magali.
Thank you for having me.